So, a lot of information from the Ultra Edge book has been released, and I could talk more about the pro heroes or more information revealed about One for All. But in this video, I'm going to be tackling something different. I'm going to be tackling an interview between Horikoshi and his 5th editor. And you may be asking why I'm doing that? Well, it's very simple. This interview reveals the secret for why Bakugo was revived and why Toga had to die. Yeah, this is a lot of juicy information and we're going to dive right into it. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to make a video discussing why Horikoshi decided to kill off Bakugo and then revive him while also killing off Toga as well. So this information comes directly from an interview from the Ultra Age book, and there are some interesting things that are brought up between Horikoshi and his editor for why Bakugo was revived and why Toga could have also survived the ending of My Hero Academia. We're going to be discussing this in more detail, but before we do that, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I make My Hero Academia content, cover the spin-offs, and just do whatever I feel like I want to do when it comes to my habits of superheroics in fiction. So if you're interested in videos like this and want to see more of me, like I said, subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that like button to show that you want to see more content like this. And without the way, let's dive right into the interview. So for starters, this is a specific interview between Kohei Horikoshi and the 5th editor, Takeru Imamura. And this section of the interview is specifically talking about the sudden announcement of the deaths of Bakugo and Toga. And I'm going to go over Bakugos first because there's some more interesting aspects of Horikoshi's storytelling, and then I'll go over Toga second. So for starters, let's just go through the interview as it was presented in the book before I discuss a little bit more of it later. For starters, there is a question of, is there an episode that left a lasting impression on you, Mr. Imamura? And Imamura responds with the episode when Bakugo was nearly killed in the fight with Shigaraki and when Toga dies. And when it came to Bakugo, it was right after the handover of the work, and he said, in reference to Kohei Horikoshi, Imamura-san, Bakugo is going to die, but is that okay? Imamura responds with a surprise when he said that so smoothly, but that you had already made plans for Bakugo's revival at that time, right? Him asking that to Kohei Horikoshi, to which Horikoshi responds with, I didn't want to kill the character, but I also wanted to express Shigaraki's overwhelming strength, so I decided to kill him off for now, with the intention of reviving him later. Imamura responds with, when I asked you when will he wake up, you said about a year or a year and a half in the real world. So I couldn't immediately reply with, okay then. I know Bakugo would come back to life, but fans will have to wait a year. And this is interesting because many people assume that the editor Takeru was actually responsible for Bakugo's death, but it was Kohei Horikoshi's the entire time. And it kind of makes sense, because for you to establish your big bad or antagonist to actually be a threat, the best way to do that is to show him killing a fan favorite or important character in the series. And who is no important and better to kill off than the pseudo Duduragonist of the series. So it makes sense that Bakugo would be the one to face the wrath of Shigaraki, but it also makes sense for him to be revived because, once again, fan favorite character. So it's very interesting to see that Horikoshi always intended for Bakugo to die and be revived, and that he anticipated his revival would take around a year and a half, which is relevant because that's how long it took, relatively speaking, between Bakugo dying and him returning in the manga proper against All for One. And finishing off this section of the interview, Horikoshi responds to Imamura by saying that he actually consulted with an emergency medical technician, to which Imamura said, theoretically, if the patient were to be sewn up the moment the heart explodes, he might be able to survive, they said. As Horikoshi responds with, I was able to depict it feeling relieved because I was told about the possibility. Imamura-san is very quick and has a light footwork with things like this, so it was really helpful. And this is very interesting because we assumed, or at least knew, that Bakugo's death and sewing up the heart was something that was consulted with, but it's revealed in this interview that it was actually Horikoshi's editor that got the approval that his revival could be possible if it's sewn up fast enough, and that Horikoshi himself thought of it but didn't think that it was actually possible, which once again buries the idea that Bakugo couldn't have survived because there's no way that his body could have been sewn up that quickly, but that's the theoretical idea of it. The idea of the reasoning why people die when like their heart is stabbed into, or if they lose a lot of blood by cutting a major artery, is that they're unable to actually repair themselves or to stop the bleeding fast enough before the person either loses all of their blood or is unable to have oxygen flow through the blood and go to the brain to keep the brain alive. So in theory, if you're able to stop the bleeding instantly or allow for the blood to continuously flow effectively enough by sewing it up, then it's in theory possible to revive someone in a state like what Bakugo was in. So yeah, just a little bit of clarification on why Bakugo was revived, and that whether or not you like this type of writing style or you like this story decision, you cannot argue that this is a decision that Horikoshi made and planned out, and at least from his perspective made the most sense for the character in the story, which, you know what, I will commend him on that, to sticking to his guns and going through with his own plan that he wanted to, because there's a question in the Ultra Data book that he wanted to do all he wanted to do in this series because he didn't know if he would get another chance. So kudos to you, I'll allow you to have that. However, I may make a video discussing how this entire sequence with Bakugo could have actually been perfect with his revival, but that's for another day. But now, going into the second part of the interview, let's talk about Toga. And the interview with Imamura starts with him saying that then the episode where Toga dies, at first, she wasn't supposed to die. She was supposed to be caught and live in prison. With Horikoshi responded with, I was proceeding with that concept in mind, but then I changed my mind halfway through. And then Imamura responds with how he got a call from Sensei while he was walking in Shinjuku and got asked, actually, is it okay to make Toga die? I was like, this is no joke. So I canceled all of my plans for the rest of the day and spent about 3 hours with Sensei discussing whether she should die or not. We explored various developments. Horikoshi responds with, there was also the idea that Toga was actually still alive. Sometimes Ochako would go to the forest where the battle had taken place and leave a syringe of her blood there, and then the next day it would be gone. Imamura says, yes, like leaving a hint at survival. And Horikoshi responds with, but in the end, that would have resulted in no one taking responsibility, so we decided not to do that. In the end, Imamura-san gave his okay. Imamura responds with, I too had a hard time deciding whether death or survival was better. And Horikoshi responds with, but thanks to you, this episode received high marks in the reader survey. And Imamura Sensei responds with, Sensei does a self-check after finishing the manuscript. Then in the last scene, he added an exclamation mark to Toga's monologue for a normal girl and made it into a normal girl. I got goosebumps because that one thing totally changed the nuance. The reading experience was completely different. The end of a girl named Toga Himiko is still sad, but became also cheerful. Horikoshi responds with, doing things like that makes my manuscript late, haha. So let's go over everything that was discussed. First of all, the confirmation that Toga was not intended to die and was meant to be caught and live in prison. So this is very interesting, mainly because many people thought and think that none of the villains at the end of the story should have died and that they all should have lived, which includes Tomoe Shigaraki, Toya Dabi, and Toga Himiko, which ironically enough, they all start with T, but that's besides the point. So this would have alleviated that part of the fandom by having one of the villains actually survive. Among the main three, if you ignore the fact that Spinner and Compress also survived, But in my personal opinion, in the opinions of others, and potentially Horikoshi himself, he viewed that as not a great idea, especially with what they discussed later on about hinting at Himiko's life by allowing Ochako to leave a blood syringe, and then the next day that blood syringe being gone. And I think that among the three options of Toga dying, her going to prison, and then this final one of her surviving and Ochako giving her blood from far away and her not being caught, that last one is the worst one, as discussed, because it means that neither Himiko nor Ochako took responsibility for their actions. And to clarify, he's not saying that Himiko dying is her taking responsibility, but that in the sequence of Uraraka being a hero and by her job description not taking in Toga is her not taking responsibility, and that Toga being alive and free also isn't her taking responsibility for her actions and murdering. So that was the worst case scenario, and I'm glad that Horikoshi didn't do it because it would have ruined both of their characters. And when it comes to the second one, of her going to jail, I think that that would work for Uraraka and allowing for her ending to be less bittersweet. However, with the reveal that Toga would rather not be alive than to be in jail and lose her freedom would be worse for Toga's character, because it would completely go against what she wants and she would not be happy in the slightest. Even if Uraraka were to continue giving blood to Toga, in the end, because Toga isn't free, she's unable to live her life the way she wants and she would be unhappy. So with the idea that Toga dies and Uraraka has to live with like the idea of her saving her for one way and then Toga saving her is probably the best way for both of their characters to go out. Because not only does Uraraka get a bittersweet ending knowing that she saved Toga, but was unable to keep her alive because Toga sacrificed her life to save Uraraka, it allows for her to eventually develop more towards the end of no longer repressing her feelings, which eventually leads to her having a happy ending, confessing her feelings to Deku. And with Toga, she was able to live the life that she wanted, even if it meant with the expense of her life, because she finally was able to live her life the way she wanted, free as a bird. And I enjoy how Horikoshi understood that potential nuance and added the exclamation mark at the end of her sentence to really show that not only was she happy, but this is kind of what she wanted and what she needed relative to her situation and how the story was structured. And that by that small change really changed the entire course and emotional relevance and resonance of that episode and of that chapter. Really just showing how small changes can truly affect and change a series in major ways. So yeah, I kind of love that we got a better understanding and a more in-depth understanding of why Horikoshi decided to allow Toga to die than to keep her alive. But yeah, both of these are very interesting and very much needed to really get into the mindset of Horikoshi and how he wrote this story. And frankly, with how both of these sequences ended with Bakugo's death and revival and Toga's death, I kind of like them how Horikoshi wrote them now versus what they could have been. But hey, that's just my opinion. And let me ask you this. Did you like how Bakugo died and got revived, or would you have him rather stay dead or stayed alive? And do you think that Toga's story would be better if she died or if she stayed alive? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!